Symbolic History Through Sight and Sound, 31, 19th Century, The Loaded Dream. Let an opening portrait pair span our theme, the perilous reshaping of two worlds, inner and outer. In Wilkie's 1805 Self, left, God affirmed inwardness, and rights of man outwardness arise together from the hopes of enlightenment. In Toulouse-Lautrec's 1880 Self, at 16, right, the backlash of such promise fires in both realms the crisis of modernity. Where first shall we take the pulse of what was leading in the arts, from transcendental assurance to symbolist estrangement, in politics, from constitutional debate to Marx and the anarchists? If the century of Berkeley and Brahms is the Romantic century, Baudelaire's Cimetière abhorré de la Lune, its stretch of spleen and ideal, aux serments, aux parfums, aux baisers infinis, makes it an insurgent hatching ground. That corpse you planted last year in your garden, has it begun to sprout? But if romantic, a recurrent pole in man and art, is to designate a time, it cannot be in mere opposition to classical. Both Hölderlin and Nietzsche were prophet lovers of Greece. The most daring pre-symbolist of France, de Nerval, says the muse has made him l'un des fils de la Grèce. And from where else did Berkeley get his great god Pan down in the reeds by the river? Nor can romantics simply oppose realism. This swamp dappled with sun, with even its frogs and scarab, could not more imitate the visual. It is the classical theme, and realist body are possessed by some sensuous abandon of romantic soul. Shift to the revolutionary strand of the century. Daumier's realism, inspired by the socialist outbreak and brief republic of 1848. Chopin, a part of the musical build-up, with Berlioz, Liszt, early Wagner, the firebrand Verdi. In literature, Georges Sand, Lamartine, and the rest, culminating in Victor Hugo, with his youthful definition of the romantic as nothing but liberalism in literature. Even Stendhal and Baudelaire, later amazed at their 1848 intoxication, all swept on a mounting wave of surge, reversal, more radical quest to affirm, as Shelley's first poetic championing of the proletariat after the massacre of Peterloo points down the century. Men of England, wherefore plough for the lords who lay ye low? Wherefore weave with toil and care the rich robes your tyrants wear? If we ask what Daumier's force shares with Berkeley's mood, it may give a clue to romantic soul, a tide of rising expectations, heightening touch and dream, wish, vulnerability, despair. It is the time loading of all physical and psychic bases. The romantic still carries that entire burden of articulated heart and world, as Keats bears the weight of Miltonic pentameter from Endymion, one faint eternal eventide of gems, to Hyperion, forest on forest hung about his head like cloud on cloud. And Baudelaire, even as he moves toward the modern, luxuriates in such visceral fullness. Mère des souvenirs, maîtresse des maîtresses, ô toi, tous mes plaisirs, ô toi, tous mes devoirs. whereas Mallarmé draws the plug which drains that voluptuous perfume of the blood, refines the forms to a hyaline shimmer, as Berkeley's explicit idyll yields to the innuendo of Douanier Rousseau's snake charmer. Huxley casts such a spell in his free translation of The Afternoon of a Faun. Between the reeds I saw their bodies gleam, who cool no mortal fever in the stream, crying to the woods the rage of their desire, and their bright hair went down in jeweled fire, where crystal broke and dazzled shudderingly. Et le splendide bain des cheveux disparaît dans la clarté et les frissons aux pierreries. Romantic had preferred the basses loaded, that we open all stops of the earth organ. Thus the tonal sob-yearnings of Brahms, even in the encroaching estrangement of the clarinet quintet. Against the dissolving tonalities of Ravel's 1903 quartet. Of course, the rhetoric of fullness the 19th century had to shed was the heritage from Baroque, with its proclaimed grandeurs of space, time, and cause, Leibniz. Therefore, each individual substance expresses the resolves which God made in regard to the whole universe. We grasp it in the light-flooded distances of Kuyp, the ground-bass tensities of a viola d'amore sonata, German, about 1670. From that heroics, much of the 18th century already lightens to the Bachlian and subjective, as in the Sons of Bach and early Haydn, here from the first quartet of Opus 20, or in such landscapes of sensibility as Norbert Gruntz, though, like Rousseau and Gray, wanders the hoary Thames along his silver winding way, this pre-romantic respects the court manners of Rococo. Certainly, as far as transcendental melting goes, the Baroque vapored to a veil. It attends the Kantian fruition of that idealism Berkeley had sowed, and to which this Friedrich, with Beethoven, Coleridge, a whole 19th century horizon are legatees. Schopenhauer, the world as will and idea. No truth, therefore, is more certain than that all that exists for knowledge, and therefore this whole world, is only object in relation to subject, perception of a perceiver, in a word, idea. The sea across which Friedrich's morning boats set sail is rayed through with the longing which Schelling's eternal one feels to give birth to itself. Such the ocean of Nietzsche's rapture, in whose seventh loneliness the silver soul fish swims from the bark, though that timeless love, for all the miscarriage of enlightenment and revolution, still clings to the tonal and spatial touch of earth. Romantic. From the same 3 centuries fix on night, 1647, Rembrandt's Rest on the Flight, with Paul Gerhardt's Evening Hymn. How the poem gleams in darkness, a sure life prayer. Nun ruhen alle Wälder. The woods are silent now. The stars golden glow in the blue halls of the sky. God give you quiet slumber. His gold bright angels render armed watch at your bedside. Stell euch die güldenen Waffen ums Bett und seiner Engel Schar. Another consciousness of ruins, lake and moonlight broods over Wright of the 1780s, as over Claudius, whose Abendlied works mood variations on Gerhardt. Der Mond ist aufgegangen. The full moon has risen. Gold star points glisten over heaven clear and bright. The silent wood is shadowed. Breathing from the meadows, the mist comes strange and white. Der weiße Nebel, wunderbar. With Friedrich, as with Eichendorff's romantic hermit, the love of nature feeds the love of death. Comfort of earth, come, silent night. I weary of the blind daylight. The still wide ocean darkens. Give rest, give ease of wish and want, until the dawn's eternal font through the dark wood sparkles. Komm, Trost der Welt, du stille Nacht, der Tag hat mich so müd gemacht, das weite Meer schon dunkelt, lass ausruhen mich von Lust und Not, bis das ewige Morgenrot den stillen Wald durchfunkelt. Novalis had turned from day to the comforting death mother, leaned over the fevered child, as Poe would vulgarize it, quaff, oh quaff, this sweet Nepenthe. Hölderlin's evening fantasy, like Friedrich's twilight landscapes, or Schubert's Nacht und Träume, suffuses such earth dusk with infinite longing. Here by his cottage quiet in the shadow sits the ploughman, with the smoke of his hearth content. Near in the peaceful village the bell of evening kindly calls to the wanderer. Back now the seaman turns to the harbor's home. In far-off cities gently the market shrouds its bustling noise. while the still arbor gleams with the affable meal of neighbors. But I then wither. Do not all mortals live in reward and labor, with change of toil and rest, finding their joy? Why for me only then does the bitter thorn not slumber? Wohin denn ich? Es leben die Sterblichen von Lohn und Arbeit. Wechselnd in Mühe und Ruhe ist alles freudig. Warum schläft denn nimmer nur mir in der Brust der Stachel? Against the dream radiance of Schinkel's Gothic, how stripped, how severe the old Gothic of faith, which has plumed such emulation. Heine, having been called a dismembered man, a divided soul, a Byron, wrote in 1829, complain rather that the world itself is split in the middle, for since the heart of the poet is the center of the world, it must at the present time be lamentably torn apart. Once the world was whole, in antiquity and in the Middle Ages. In spite of superficial struggles, there was always an inner unity, and there were integrated poets. We honor these poets and we rejoice in them. But every imitation of their unity is a lie that every sound eye penetrates. So Arnold at the monastery of the Grande Chartreuse, wandering between two worlds, one dead, the other powerless to be born, implores, take me cowled forms, and fence me round till I possess my soul again. But since Arnold's strange disease of modern life is in fact the fruit of Hegelian consciousness, why not celebrate its ripe introspection, what Coleridge most shares with the Germans? No cloud, no relic of the sunken day distinguishes the west, no long thin slip of sullen light, no obscure trembling hues. Come, we will rest on this old mossy bridge, which Victor Hugo distills in his early plays. Hernani, regarde, plus de feu, plus de bruit, tout se tait. La lune tout à l'heure à l'horizon montait, tandis que tu parlais, je me sentais joyeuse et calme, ô mon amant, et j'aurais bien voulu mourir en ce moment. Les biographes, true, the sun is beautiful, its rays, the last, now set a crown on Taunus' brow. The river gleams, the forests take the fire. All nature is a flood of life and light. La nature est un flot de vie et de lumière. Though the cult Gothic of Coleridge's Christabel, Keith's Eve of St. Agnes, Schumann's Cathedral in the Rhine Symphony, in romantic fullness and repletion, is far from what it hungers after. Renaissance, Baroque, Transcendental have intervened. Runge's 1806 Christ on the Sea of Galilee shapes the world from subjectivity no less than Goethe's Faust or the rhyme of the ancient mariner. And the coming wind did roar more loud, and the sails did sigh like sedge, and the rain poured down from one black cloud. The moon was at its edge. The harbour bay was clear as glass, so smoothly it was strewn, and on the bay the moonlight lay, and the shadow of the moon. What is reached for is Schelling's primordial will. The primal longing moves like a surging, billowing sea, but there is born in God himself an inward, imaginative response, the first stirring of divine being in its still, dark depths. Schelling's birth out of darkness into light is no less of good from evil. The living word enters as a firm and enduring center in battle against chaos, and a declared state of war between good and evil continues to the present time, when God reveals himself as spirit, that is, as concrete actuality. That revelation is not purely a life motion. When Goethe made a poem of this Correggio rape of Ganymede, he gave it the dithyrambs of dissolving. I come, but where? Upward, upward. Clouds of the sky bend to me. Me, I am here, seizing, seized, all-loving Father, upward, on your breast. Mir, mir, umfangend, umfangen, aufwärts, an deinen Busen, liebender Vater. With such heart's wish, Proudhon stretches the Greco-Roman psyche and the style of Correggio. The surface is classical, but neither the vagabond soul of Chénier's loving Néard, nor Keats' Endymion glimpsing his goddess in dream cave or by plashing pool, has wagered more desperately on a thing of beauty is a joy forever. Against the satanic mills of actual flesh, a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue, those leaf-fringed legends of a Grecian urn, thou still unravished bride of quietness, that draught of vintage of a nightingale, thou wast not born for death, immortal bird, beat urgent wings. When Turner adds to classical subject, here Ulysses deriding Polyphemus, not only romantic heart, but a color play that turns whatever could be touched and seen to charmed magic casements, opening on the foam of perilous seas, in fairy lands forlorn. Then, as in those field nocturnes, which inspired those of Chopin. Such life and hunger for life initiate a dissolving, as Turner's blind giant melts into cloud over rocks and sunset sea, which would run in art to Monet and Redon, in music to Debussy and Scriabin. What is the aim on Richter's Rhine crossing, or Schumann's Rhine, but to take as one the riches of earth and spirit, to foster both nostalgias of the finite and infinite, as with Mignon and the harper in Goethe's Wilhelm Meister. Do you know the land where lemon trees bloom? Kennst du das Land, wo die Zitronen blühen? Dahin, dahin, möcht ich mit dir, o mein Geliebter, ziehen. a point of departure for Eichendorff's post-horn and wanderers singing of the south, of statues and fountains by moonlight in summer gardens. Always the orchestrations of Todeslust, die Sonne funken sprühend im Versinken, gibt noch einmal der Erde Glut zu trinken. Always the soul flight of Mondnacht, and my soul spread her pinions wide in the kindred gloom, flew through the silent regions as if she flew toward home, als flöge sie nach Haus. Lamartine would suspend time's flight by returning alone to the lake where the two, boating in silence, had heard far off oars and the harmonious waves. Un soir, t'en souvient-il, nous voguions en silence. On entendait au loin sur l'onde et sur les cieux que le bruit des rameurs qui frappaient en cadence tes flots harmonieux. In Italy, Leopardi reels such earth loves over the infinite vanity of all, e l'infinita vanità del tutto. Never in history had soul and the ideal so seized on world and flesh. As Jung said, when Freud took off the psychic lid of Europe, he found the whole landscape flooded with sex. Moritz von Schwintz, rock-pooled mystery of midday, queer as Andersen's fairy tales, the red slippers, the snow queen. Those fish, like a Shakespearean pun, the bawdy hand of the dial upon the very prick of noon, around the hair-curtained form and reflection, dream overcharge the pubic mandala. So in Schumann's Frauenliebe und Leben. Though what Adler would find was will to power, Jung will to myth. As in Menzel's 1847 study of his sister, like Fräulein von Kulp, who turned in the hall, Madame de Tornquist shifting the candles, all the bases of desire are loaded. Even the photographs, Julia Margaret Cameron's old Faust men and tender Gretchen girls, voice it no less than the sonnet Victor Hugo, past 80, wrote to Judith Gautier. La morte et la beauté sont deux choses profondes. Death and beauty are two somber loves, as deep in blue and shade as if to say, two sisters, alike fecund and destructive, bearing the burden of one mystery. Loves, voices, looks, tresses dark and fair, be radiant, for I die. Hold light, warmth, solace, you pearls the sea rolls in waves up the shore, you birds that nestle luminous in the forest. Judith, our destinies are nearer kin than one might think to see your face and mine. The abyss of all opens in your eyes, the same starred gulf I harbor in my soul. We are neighbors of the sky, and for this cause, that you are beautiful, and I am old. Judith, nos deux destins sont plus près l'un de l'autre, qu'on ne croirait avoir mon visage et le vôtre. Tout le divin abîme apparaît dans vos yeux, et moi, je sens le gouffre étoilé dans mon âme. Nous sommes tous les deux voisins du ciel, madame, puisque vous êtes belle, et puisque je suis vieux. Has such romantic soul appeared before? No doubt in all ripe civilizations there is some filling in of conscious touch and longing, the blind harper from an Egyptian tomb of the time of Akhenaten. Or there are those frescoes 1,500 years later from the Bay of Naples, a pleasure seat of imperial Rome, its Euripidean and Hellenistic refinements already centuries old. What civilization could be riper than Ming Chinese, 1470, Shen Chu reading out of doors, the poem? The big trees exposed to the west wind are losing their leaves. To be comfortable, I've unfastened the collar of my robe. Sitting here, I'm letting the time go by. Doing nothing, I've turned my back on encroaching autumn. I've not finished my book. My spirit has gone wandering in the sky. Who can fathom it? Yet personality in these anticipations seems contained in ancient traditions of philosophic and religious lore. It had hardly ventured on the blossom and tear-bearing branch of Lenbach's 1860 Shepherd Boy, or Smetana's Bohemian fields and groves, all those intimations of immortality from Wordsworth's All the earth is gay, land and sea give themselves up to jollity. Thou child of joy, shout round me, let me hear thy shouts, thou happy shepherd boy. To Longfellow's, a boy's will is the wind's will, and the thoughts of youth are long, long thoughts. Startling that a civilization which would go so far in temporal deification should, in its Gothic phase, have reduced earthly delights to the mumming foibles of religious feasts under cowed disapprobation, while in that music the major and minor chords, essential to romantic joy and grief, are passing tones. They melt with the dissonances of earth into bare fifths and octaves beyond the vanity of our moods. How often we have traced in that faith ground the ripening of what would become romantic personality. How archly tempting here in Dufay and Petrus Christus to the time tree of consciousness. A fruit Vermeer's girl with the pearl earrings has gloriously eaten, and what is it but wholesome and good to the taste, sustaining the earth loves, to which Bach, for Anna Magdalena, gave pre-romantic voice. In the 46-year-old Watts' painting of his 16-year-old wife, the actress Ellen Terry, to leave him in a year, love, fevered as voluptuous, pants for the spectre of a rose, Petronius harbor for a stilled desire, luxe, calme et volupté, as in Baudelaire's Invitation to the Voyage, supremely, as set about 1870 by Duparc. But here we should read a sheaf of Baudelaire, closing perhaps with the condemned jet d'eau, erotic fountain. Tes beaux yeux sont là, pauvre amante. Your beautiful eyes are tired, let them close. You whom night so beautifies, that it is sweet bent to your breast, to hear the sad eternal cries weep to the bowl from the water's crest. Moon, sounding drops, night serene, the melancholy of your mien is the mirror of my love. the fountain fills the night with flower spheres that in the pale light of the moon's spears fall from the height like a burst of tears. Tombe comme une averse de larges pleurs. Have West and East converged toward modern consciousness? The burning of the Sanjo Palace, as painted 100 years after in 13th century Japan, is, like Gothic, mytho-symbolic. But this Edo screen of the pleasure quarters of Kyoto has the social irony and wit of Molière and the English Restoration, with which it is contemporary. While the Hiroshige woodblock of 1857, A Sudden Rain at Ohashi, is abreast with the realism and mood drama of 19th century Europe. If the world community attests such concurrence, what has arisen in the West to revolutionize everything is the assertive consciousness of person. Here it just shows itself in the time of Wycliffe and the First People's Wars, as this author takes up the banner under the angular asperities of creed invalidation. Gawain, flower of chivalry, returns from the green night, bearing about his neck the snaky belt of his temptation and fall, symbolic frailty of this crabbed flesh. In Dürer's 1526 portrait of that dubious operator Kleberger, ego seems to express once and for all its earth mastery. The same years, Vives, riding the wave that spread with Pico's dignity of man, describes a feast of the gods. The universe was the amphitheater, in the skies the divine spectators. The earth was a stage for the actors. They saw man, the mime of Jupiter, take the mask of a plant, of 1,000 wild beasts, then his own, prudent, just, friendly, a political and social being. The gods were not expecting to see him in more shapes, when, behold, he appeared as one of their own race. He had transcended man and the lower gods, and was piercing into that inaccessible light in dark, where Jupiter dwells, king of kings and of gods. While Fugger launched modern capitalism, and Geismar, leader of the peasants' revolt, wrote his bill of reform, all privileges shall be done away with, as they are contrary to the word of God. All city walls, castles, fortresses shall be demolished. No profit is to be made, as all things are to be sold at cost. We have witnessed over Europe and America, that pioneer soil for Protestant and free humanist dreams, how the complex of thrust and counterthrust builds a transformational current whose eddies and regressive whirls gather head and jet again into the main stream, altering and darkening its course, as under the shades of Rembrandt's Polish Rider, the deepened reality of Leonardo's Horseman strides into the century of brooding Baroque and Milton's Commonwealth. How even when that confidence hardens to a wigged pomp of state, Schlüter's Prussian Elector, Fischer's overture in the style of Lully, such blatant mutants of the humanist claim, hung as it were between Newton's synthesis and a Dryden heroic play, carry the force that would drive through the ironic whirls of Rococo to break out in the inalienable rights of man. And what right, if not to Vives' enactment of the gods? And already, in the 1760s of Rousseau's Éclat, Lyotard had pasteled himself in his own garden in the mountain canton of Geneva, a waymark to every Connecticut Yankee in those dogmatic courts. So, on the Easter morning of Goethe's Faust, the people crowd from stone gateways, mills, and vaulted churches to the natural resurrection of the Lord, sind sie alle ans Licht gebracht. Had not even Pope said, an honest man's the noblest work of God, to be taken up by Burns, a man's a man for a' that. And the world of inertia, oversurge, and backlash being what it is, what could come of that plea but that Marat, champion of the people, murdered first by the intemperance of his aims, should be stabbed by Charlotte Corday in the bath? Were the dying words, as she reported, "They shall all be guillotined." David painted him, his truest picture, art climax of revolution turning on itself. Let it be stressed again that the Romantic century, Schelling, Friedrich, Hölderlin, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Austen, Beethoven, Schubert, Byron, Keats, Lamartine, Hugo, all varieties of transcendental immersion and socialist attack work in the known shadow of that populist tailspin into terror. As for David, he slid through the coronation of Napoleon and of Josephine to the slickness in Brussels exile of this Mars disarmed by Venus with her aids. The 19th century had to face that degradation too, revolution gone as vapid as in von Weber's Freischütz. So it was the 18th century Rococo, Telemann, and the Millionenzimmerer Schönbrunn, which the royalist regimes of post-revolution would espouse. And why not? Had not Rococo shared an enlightenment, its melodies everywhere beckoning to the heart, its chords loaded with supposititious good? What good could be greater than Napoleon III's entertainment of Queen Victoria and Albert in a Paris showy as Berlioz's waltz in the Fantastique, but a show gone hectic, like all the Vanity Fairs of Stendhal, Balzac, Flaubert, de Maupassant, driven to a drugged frenzy, those death-wish Kuragins of War and Peace, Anatole, Hippolyte, white-armed Ellen, and through them the harlot's house of wild. The dead are dancing with the dead, the dust is whirling with the dust, into which from time to time yearning Emmas and Natashas are drawn. My dearest Clough, Arnold would write, these are damned times, everything is against one. The height to which knowledge has come, the spread of luxury, our physical enervation, the absence of great natures, the unavoidable contact with millions of small ones, newspapers, cities, light, profligate friends, moral desperadoes like Carlyle, our own selves, and the sickening consciousness of our difficulties. Great qualities are trodden down, and littleness united is become invincible. In a depiction of the century, put Sir Thomas Lawrence's 1819 George IV, 9.5 feet high, and in the Vatican, on Byron's sinister side, counter-revolutionary background of whatever he wrote and did. And on his creative right, the continuing fierce vision of William Blake, an eternal doctrine of revolution, against any crowned Vala's court of submission and death, whether of rights of man or socialist manifesto, a radical judgment for which the musical likeness seems always and only Beethoven's great fugue. those embattled extremes. The neoclassic all over Europe, crossing into the new century, took the quiet glow of transcendental and early romantic, as in Kersting of the Friedrich Circle, or the delight of Schubert's early symphonies. Here the Faust and fire forms leave a space of calm for the balancing of the leaf. Thus through all nature, water counters fire, plant, animal, grazer, hunter. And if there is truth in Goethe's extending the ratio to woman against man, women consider more how things are linked in life, since their fate and the fate of their families depends on this continuity. Then it is fit that the ultimate perfection in art of the vegetable weft should be in the novels of a woman, Jane Austen. Thus the baronet in Mansfield Park of his son and the poor cousin Fanny, sick of ambitious and mercenary connections, prizing more and more the sterling good of principle and temper, he had pondered with genuine satisfaction on the more than possibility of the two young friends finding their mutual consolation in each other for all that had occurred of disappointment to either. Fanny was indeed the daughter that he wanted. With so much true merit and true love, and no want of fortune and friends, the happiness of the married cousins must appear as secure as earthly happiness can be. Anger had begun in that vein, left this 1806 Mademoiselle Riviera in the studied dress and pose of the cult of nature. But if one leaps 45 years to a portrait from Anger's age right, it is not just that the sitter is heavier and older, or the dress changed from naive white to black, Carmen and Cleopatra. What speaks through that is social, the stuffy hardening of the Third Empire. Against the dreams of Emma Rouault's youth, her futile wish for romance in marriage, if in the freshness of her beauty, before the soiling of marriage and the disillusions of adultery, she could have anchored her life upon some great, strong heart, she would never have fallen from so high a happiness. Comes the fate, as in a Chopin waltz, to which Emma Bovary is bound, that town circle of hideous trade, the draper tempting her with money, the eternal monotony, even of clandestine passion, down to the blind man's song mocking her as she dies. Mates in the warmth of a summer day, dream of love and of love alway. The focus on self as affirming center, Jericho's likeness of his young friend Delacroix, bears under the flesh claim those fallings from us and blank misgivings of Wordsworth's intimations, Coleridge plucking the poisons of self-harm, Berlioz's Childe Harold, since behind the romantic as Promethean, lie Jericho's later studies of corpses, guillotined heads, the criminally insane, wave of terror reminders of Poe's macabre obsession, to be turned to sex by Baudelaire, Une Charogne. Remember my love by the roadway, a hideous carrion, with legs flexed in the air like a courtesan. The flies swarmed on that putrid vulva, maggots over those rags that lived and seemed to breathe, as if the romantic self were haunted, like Emma Bovary by the blind beggar, She saw the hideous face of the poor wretch standing out against the eternal night like a menace. She fell back upon the mattress in a convulsion. They all drew near. She was dead. As Dostoevsky's egoists would be haunted by dreams of horses beat down and children tortured. What flowed from Kubla Khan, a savage place as holy and enchanted as air beneath a waning moon was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover to pose Ulalume. Well, I know now this dim lake of Auber, this misty mid-region of Weir. Well, I know now this dank tarn of Auber, this ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir, is reflected in the English painter Martin, with whom Heine compared Berlioz. Here, the wanderings of Sadak in search of the waters of oblivion. Yet Martin's slick art of nightmare stems from the same years as Constable's daytime celebration of the actual earth, which, like Jane Austen's peopled scene, smiled through wars and rumors of wars. The radiant is transcendental, as in early Wordsworth. The sky, never before so beautiful, sank down into my heart and held me like a dream. An almost German mystic presence, laid asleep in body and become a living soul. But it gathers a fabric of descriptive color and feel. Give me a Constable, they used to say, with the dew on it. A vibrance later Wordsworth could bring off now and then. There was a roaring in the wind all night. The rain came heavily and fell in floods, but now the sun is rising calm and bright. The birds are singing in the distant woods. Over his own sweet voice the stock-dove broods. The jay makes answer as the magpie chatters, and all the air is filled with pleasant noise of waters. But Constable, too, had his polarity of peace and storm. What woke up the French at the Paris show of 1824, so that Delacroix took his massacre at Chios from the salon wall to give it the brushwork of broken color, was late Constable's clair obscure and fury of palette, rooted in the Baroque crisis of Magnasco and reaching for the crisis of Expressionism. As the painter said, after the death of his wife, tempest on tempest rolls, still the darkness is majestic. Some would limit romantic to such storm and stress of body, but its core is deeper. Man and nature, one incarnate Godhead. Malgré moi, de Musset protested, l'infini me tourmente. Where soul becomes world flesh, art violence is a measure of spirit's war on itself. So with the earth and clouds, Diaz de la Peña learned from Constable and fomented for half a century, here from 1871. But through calm or fury runs the pantheist thread of de Nerval's Vers dorés. Duncan, man, free thinker, do you believe yourself the one alone thinking in this world where life bursts forth in everything? Un mystère d'amour dans le métal repose. A mystery of love lies concealed in the metal. Beware in the blind wall a gaze that watches you. Often in the obscure being dwells a hidden God, and like a nascent eye covered by its lids, a pure spirit grows beneath the skin of stones. How Victor Hugo would spill that earth soul through his early poems. Tonight the sun has set in a sky of clouds. Le soleil s'est couché ce soir dans la nuée. In such a field, each artist shapes his own path under relational probabilities. Corot, beginning about 1826 with luminous scenes of Rome, both classic and early romantic, would blur the dark of mid-century to a kind of Salon Arcadia, a Greek cult, to metastasize in Bouguereau, Puvis de Chavannes, Swiss Berquelin, as in academic sculpture everywhere, reaching in poetry through Tennyson, Arnold, Swinburne, to the last gentleman of the columned American South, William Alexander Percy, dreaming of Sappho on the levee over the Mississippi. Men still thought of themselves as fleeting and nature as eternal, the immense and radiant world. Je m'en irai sans que rien ne manque au monde immense et radieux. Yet as man's power mounts iron, coal, and steam, the infinite drowning has the feel of mutual death, with Chopin's funeral march, sonata Delacroix and Leopardi, sempre caro mi fu quest'ermo colle. This lonely hill was always dear to me, and this hedgerow that from so wide a part of the ultimate horizon shuts the view. But as I look beyond it, I conceive a space which has no measure, a quiet not of man, a hush and void that draw the heart almost to the brink of fear. And as the wind noises in the leaves, I set that voice against the silence of the infinite, and call to mind the eternal and lost time, and this that lives and sounds. And so it comes, in that immensity my thought is drowned, and sweet to me is shipwreck in that sea. E il naufragar m'è dolce in questo mare. To Delacroix's pastel, Courbet adds mass and volume, a cloud gathering reached for in Tennyson. There lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail, there gloom the dark, broad seas. That mood space stretches out in Arnold's Dover beach. On the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand glimmering and vast out in the tranquil bay. In some Meredith, the largeness of the evening earth clots round us like the blood of modern love, moves dark as yonder midnight ocean's force to throw that faint, thin line upon the shore. But it is Victor Hugo who most summons the storm, sailors gone down in Oceano Nox, dans une mer sans fond, par une nuit sans lune, until the creation he entered as a realm of light rounds to a great wheel, which cannot move without crushing someone, que la création est une grande roue qui ne peut se mouvoir sans écraser quelqu'un. Though when Hugo took to inkwash and watercolor in the late 1850s, he cut through space as Blake had done, reaching back to Bosch and ahead to the surreal, a road he would parallel with more knowing defiance of the forms in his last poems, so the trumpet of judgment. I saw a monstrous trumpet in the clouds, forged out of justice condensed into brass. It lay on a mist that trembled unfathomable out of the world. Oh, what night! Nothing there has contour nor age, and the cloud is spectre, and the spectre cloud, et le nuage est spectre, et le spectre est nuage, revealing sea-mark for the youth who had declared Romanticism is nothing but liberalism in literature. The continuing optimism of the century seemed to be science. How the old Turner's theory and practice of light gives his most pessimistic apocalypse of heaven, this eve of the deluge, the élan of an electrical discovery by Faraday or Maxwell, or pain-racked Darwin's Origin of Species, to contemplate a tangled bank, plants of many kinds, birds singing, insects flitting, worms crawling, and to reflect that these elaborately constructed forms have all been produced by variability, the struggle for life, natural selection. Thus, from the war of nature, the production of the higher animals directly follows. There is grandeur in this view. Was the art cognate of science not the realism of the century, but the search beyond realism? What gave Constable such headway against his moods, but the pursuit of painting as scientific and mechanical? Later, the technique of pure color would rescue impressionists from the bogs of Baudelaire. while that, combined with geometric analysis, would turn the splenetic solitudes of Cézanne to clarity, as he would say, "I have only painted all my life to escape the ennui." Though the ambiguity which stretches the Wagnerian ocean of Feuerbach's Medea broodings also had its center in science, as late as 1847, Helmholtz could celebrate the first law of thermodynamics. The universe possesses once for all a store of energy which is not altered by any change of phenomena, can neither be increased nor diminished, and which maintains any change which takes place on it. Yet Carnot had already proved the motive power of heat, fixed solely by the always equalizing temperature gradient, an insight clinched in Clausius' 1850 formulation of the spent energy in any system. The entropy of the universe tends toward a maximum, which Kelvin's second law would give apocalyptic irreversibility. Within a finite period of time past, the earth must have been, and within a finite period of time to come, the earth must again be, unfit for the habitation of man as at present constituted, unless operations have been or are to be performed which are impossible under the laws to which the known operations going on at present in the material world are subject. Since Rubens' art power had seized on the beast, horse, pitted sometimes against lion or tiger. In Blake's Bible of Revolution, the tigers of wrath wiser than the horses of instruction. So Stubbs had painted them in that England, time of Haydn's Opus 20 quartets, island cognate for the storm and stress of the continent, bold as mad Christopher Smart's Jubilate Agno, for a lion roars himself complete from head to tail. And so freshly painted, they changed the art of Jericho when he came to England. Though Jericho had already ventured on the horses at the Corso in Rome, and with an elevation of classic and romantic, like Beethoven's in the 7th Symphony. By the event of Delacroix's 1860 horses emerging from the sea, Wagner had written Tannhäuser, Lohengrin, Tristan, and much of the Ring. The cult of exotic savagery, Delacroix's splendid tigers, as Clark says, his best self-portraits, was crooning toward Les Cantelil's 1869, primeval earth of beast death and volcanic blood, where the creator panted in his creation, setting for his sinister Superman Cain. But beyond the lava heights of Gelboy Hoar, charged with a boiling mist of savage smells, which bears and roaring lions spewed and fumed, sounded like seas outraged by cyclone winds, death rattles rising from those livid shades. By 1874, Wagner had completed the Götterdämmerung, and Börcklin was midway in his series of battling centaurs. But what in the fire fall of Valhalla, when flames and Rhine flood close the twilight of the gods? What is the import of that rippling death by water, coming in like a tide of sensuous good? What the relation of Impressionism's poignant and shimmering dream to the contemporary deep-rooted and widespread tree of romantic and symbolist pain? Count Axel's death persuasion. Our existence is full and its cup is running over. Is it as in the nether abyss of the marriage of heaven and hell, when from the cataract of fire and serpent foes the tiger-striped head of Leviathan rears, tinging the black deep with beams of blood, advancing toward us with all the fury of a spiritual existence, and the frightened cherub flees, and Blake finds himself sitting on a pleasant bank beside a river by moonlight, hearing a harper who sung to the harp. Are Monet's bright visions outward or within? In any case, it was at the heart of Wagner's Zarathustrian and chromatic longing that the tonal dissolutions of musical impressionism, beginning with Saint-Saëns, would appear. Sculpture, denied the levitating science of color, hardly got the dance of delight off the ground. Carpeau's opera nymphs may hint at a flaw in romantic joy, even in the greatest, those inadequate allegros, finales of works too searching to be rondo resolved, from Mozart's G minor quintet through the dry-leaf whirl after Beethoven's A minor adagio. To the hectic flush closing Schubert's great string quintet. No wonder Beethoven tried radical finales, the choral of the Ninth, the visionary variations of the last piano sonata, the quartet Grosse Fuge. Melville, the truest of all men, was the man of sorrows. Let Rodin's Ugolino from the gates of hell, against Carpeau's dance, twist the intolerable theme of Ibsen's ghosts. As Oswald tells his mother of the inherited syphilis eating at his brain, he contrasts the old view of life, a state of wretchedness under punishment for sin, with the awakening of Impressionist Paris, Goethe's Easter again. The souls come up from vaults and cellars. Oswald, the mere fact of being alive is thought to be a matter for exultant happiness. Mother, have you noticed that everything I have painted has turned upon the joy of life? And it is just this beaming happiness and presumptive good which is denied when, as the mother pulling the curtains on the sunrise comforts her son, "Look, Oswald, what a lovely day we are going to have. The attack falls." Oswald, who has been sitting motionless in the armchair with his back to the scene outside, suddenly says, "Mother, give me the sun." Oswald seems to shrink up in the chair. All his muscles relax, his face loses its expression, and his eyes stare stupidly. Mrs. Alving is trembling with terror. "What is it?" Screams, "Oswald, what is the matter with you?" Throws herself on her knees beside him and shakes him. "Oswald, Oswald, look at me. Don't you know me?" Oswald, in an expressionless voice, "The sun, the sun." Around the middle of the century, Gérard de Nerval wrote the transforming symbolist poem El Desdichado, from which Eliot quotes one line in The Wasteland and paraphrases another in Proof Rock. But from Poe through Baudelaire to Mallarmé and Rimbaud, symbolism was abstracting itself from romantic by a motion of estrangement. In Delacroix's early portrait of himself as Ravenswood, hero-suicide of Scott's Bride of Lammermoor, we grope toward de Nerval's Disinherited. Je suis le ténébreux, le veuf, l'inconsolé, le prince d'Aquitaine à la tour abolie. I am the darkness, widowed, unconsoled, the prince of Aquitaine, of the ruined tower. My one star is dead, my lute, star-scrolled, burns with the black sun of an old despair. Berkeley, 1875, still holds the intolerable Wagnerian longing, empty and waste the sea, which in de Nerval and even in Wagner's lonely pipe begins to escape from the causal fabric. You who healed me in the night of the tomb, give me Posillipo and the Gulf again. Rends-moi le Posillipe et la mer d'Italie. You who fed my life with your bloom, give me the trellis of the rose and the vine, la treille ou le pampre à la rose salie. Am I Phoebus or Love, Byron or Lusignan? My forehead is red with the kiss of the queen. Mon front est rouge encore du baiser de la reine. I have dreamed in caves where sea sirens rise. J'ai rêvé dans la grotte où nage la sirène. Conqueror twice I have crossed the Acheron, singing by turns to the Orphic lyre the moans of the saint, the fée Melusina's cries, les soupirs de la sainte et les cris de la fée. With the 1860s, as in Cézanne's portrait of the painter Achille Empereur, the monstrous egg of longing begins to crack to the radical and elemental. Mussorgsky and Dostoevsky also beginning what would culminate in Boris and the Brothers. But in that revolt of the disinherited, who can tell whether the attack is religious, social, aesthetic, estranged from what Flaubert called society's brutal course? Cézanne and Marx meet in Kierkegaard's Night of Faith, who knows that it is glorious to belong to the universal, but that higher than this there winds a solitary path. He knows that it is terrible to be born outside the universal, to walk without meeting a single traveler. Humanly speaking, he is crazy and cannot make himself intelligible to anyone. The poles of day and night, outward and inward, had shadowed Rousseau's enlightenment with his melancholy. And as storm and stress struck through revolution toward romantic, the schemes of head, the dreams of heart, meet in repeated transformations, but hardening, from the liberal bourgeois to socialist labor, darkening, from transcendental to symbolist. In the first decades of the century, Goya's message of the forge is contemporary with his black mythologies, Saturn devouring his children, a dog buried in the sand. At the storm center of the French Revolution, Babeuf, knowing the rich had let them down, gave his life in conspiracy for a society of equals. His followers were the link between Robespierre and the Manifesto. The sin which in Dante sets the usurers clutching their pouches on the hot sand and under the flames at the edge of lower hell had sprinkled the arts of Renaissance and rising capital with satanic extortioners, as in this Peter Bruegel the Younger, or about the same time Sir Giles Overreach in Massinger's play. His agent, Morrall, speaks.
The justice did his part, returning the certificate against his conscience and his knowledge too, to the utter ruin of the poor farmer.
Overreach. 'Twas for these good ends I made him justice, so he served my purposes. Let him hang or damn, I care not. Friendship is but a word. With Daumier, as everywhere in the 19th century, the attack is no longer religious but social. And where the abuse had seemed exceptional, what is caricatured here is the monthly assembly of ruling property, as Daumier titles it, the legislative belly. So Les Contes de Lille to the moderns. Murderers of gods, the time is near when, sprawled on a great heap of hoarded gold, having gnawed down to bare rock the nourishing soil, not knowing what to do with the days and the nights, drowned in the nothingness of utter boredom, you will die stupidly cramming your pockets. This is the ubiquitous money bags of Marx's labor process, who tries to justify his existence. Have I myself not worked, not performed the labor of superintendence? While his overlooker and his manager try to hide their smiles. The hard-fought sin of usury has become the baptized fabric of Christian society. Marx, the sphere within whose boundaries the sale and purchase of labor goes on, is in fact the very Eden of the innate rights of man. The English Houses of Parliament, built after the fire Turner painted, are a windowed shell before the operations of imperial banking, manufacture, and trade. Ironic inversion, Marx, the religious world is but the reflex of the real world. That such a shell should take the ancient sacred form of perpendicular Gothic. But Marx's irony yielded to such a rage. The Pharisee of a capitalist denounces this brutality, which he himself creates, perpetuates, and exploits, that he perhaps undervalued the reform Christianity of those fish-blooded bourgeoisie. Not so their Faustian power. That capitalist drone, who did not seem to labor or even superintend, becomes the driving force of a process as staggering as the Krupp steam hammer of 1861, apparent model in Chaplin's Modern Times. In industry, Marx writes, man succeeded for the first time in making the product of his past labor work on a large scale gratuitously like the forces of nature. Now the work of directing, superintending, and adjusting, required by all combined labor on a large scale, becomes one of the functions of capital. The result is an industrialization labor could never have achieved on its own. A mechanical monster whose body fills whole factories and whose demon power, at first veiled under the slow and measured motion of his giant limbs, at length breaks out into the fast and furious whirl of his countless working organs. Here the capitalist steps forth in giant boots, such a Faust of accumulations as dwarfs Dickens' Hard Times Bounderby. He ruthlessly forces the human race to produce those material conditions which alone can form the real basis of a higher form of society, a society in which the full and free development of every individual is the ruling principle. Self-indulgent moneybags is almost lost in this devotee, yet two souls, alas, dwell in his breast, a Faustian conflict between the passion for accumulation and the desire for enjoyment. The predictable fall of that Faust ambivalence distinguishes dialectic materialism from the poetic cry against the same abuses, Blake's Chimney Sweeper, a little black thing among the snow, crying weep, weep in notes of woe. Where are thy father and mother, say? They are both gone up to the church to pray. Compare Marx. Previously, the workman sold his own labor power. Now he sells his wife and child. He has become a slave dealer. In spite of legislation, the number of boys sold in Great Britain by their parents to act as live chimney-sweeping machines exceeds 2,000. but to forge that outrage on the model of Newton's causality, which Darwin also stretched by metaphor to an equational science of value, Marx, in the face of an organic unfolding of power riches self-created, reverting to the old a priori, nothing can come of nothing, and so deriving from the quantified ground of labor all productive machinery and accumulations, where the organizing capitalist supplies nothing, nature costs nothing, cooperation nothing, past labor congealed in machines works gratuitously, and that live monster that is fruitful and multiplies must be distrained from the only postulated source. The ownership of past unpaid labor is therefore the sole condition for the appropriation of living unpaid labor on a constantly increasing scale. To hammer outrage into the axiomatic net of Das Kapital, Blake might have thought a Eurasenic task, though the rhetoric glows like Louver, like the dark oils of Daumier's third-class carriage. All means for the development of production transform themselves into means of domination over and exploitation of the producers. They mutilate the laborer into a fragment of a man, degrade him to the level of an appendage of a machine, destroy every remnant of charm in his work, and turn it into a hated toil. They estrange him from the intellectual potentialities of the labor process, turn his lifetime into working time, and drag his wife and child beneath the wheels of the juggernaut of capital. But all methods for the production of surplus value are at the same time methods of accumulation, and every extension of accumulation becomes again a means for the development of those methods. It follows, therefore, that in proportion as capital accumulates, the lot of the laborer, be his payment high or low, must grow worse. So Van Gogh's potato eaters have sunk from Daumier's third class to the lowest depths. Marx, capital is dead labor, that vampire-like only lives by sucking living labor, and lives the more labor it can suck. In Van Gogh, who had preached in the mining regions of Mons, evangelical Christianity, socialist sympathy, and symbolist art all meet in an expressionist break and transvaluation of value. Russia, battleground of Christian, symbolist, and socialist extremes, was a land so bedded in the past that folk building of the 18th century combines the domes of Byzantine and Tartar with the timbering of the Viking North. A land which now at the stile surface telescopes French Rococo, English liberalism, and German Romantic, surging toward the 1900s like Gogol's Troika in Dead Souls. And Russia, art thou not too flying onward like a spirited Troika that nothing can overtake? What terrifying onrush, what mysterious force never seen before? Ah, horses, what horses? Is the wind hidden under your manes? Russia, whither? She gives no answer. The ringing of the bells melts into music. Everything on earth is flying by, and the other states and nations, with looks askance, make way and draw aside. The Troika is our clue to Gogol's plan that Dead Souls, study of Russia in social decay, should be the first of a regenerative trilogy. He is said to have written the second, a purgatory of transition, but burned it dissatisfied, and again, after painful rewriting, by mistake. The third, the Paradiso, was not attempted. This painter, Ivanov, spent the same 30 years working toward a religious masterpiece, the appearance of Christ before the multitudes, of which yearning sketches remain the best fruit. Dostoevsky, too, who shifted crime and punishment from suicide course to salvation, intended a trilogy, of which the present Brothers, centered in Ivan, would be the inferno of a pan-Slavic ascent of Russia tried and saved. As Father Paisi says, The church is not to be transformed into the state. That is Rome and its dream. On the contrary, the state is transformed into the church, will ascend and become a church over the whole world, which is the opposite of Rome, and is only the glorious destiny ordained for the Orthodox Church. This star will arise in the east. That destiny was spiritual, but it has come to pass by materialism. Anathema to the great man of the 40s, this Tolstoy, painted in age by rapine, a hint at the reversals of the organizing play. Thus Lemaitre, Tolstoy's Napoleonic source, Catholic and royalist counterpole to the liberal ferment, had become a feature of the court of the Tsars. In absorbing that skeptic absolutism, Tolstoy turns it to an intuitive surrender to the divinity of the peasant mass, the prompting of Russian soul. So his Platon Karatayev, the Plato who cannot speak well, mediates Pierre's life acceptance with the barefoot search in which Tolstoy would close his life. But for Kutuzov's enactment of the Slavic will, already wrenched from Lemaitre's Machiavellian power politics, to incorporate itself by a further antinomy, the proletarian iconoclasm of Marx, for an actualization, the converse of Father Païssy's dream, is a dialectic the aristocrats of Russian soul could hardly have anticipated. Vrubel's 1890 brooding demon or genie, its symbolist forms breaking into the abstract, closes the century. Let it stand with Scriabin, who made his life a medley of visions extolling three things: the new art, the new gospel, the new left. There must be no more money and no more poor. All his music was in preparation for a great tone poem mystery, for which he had invented a language of cries and ejaculations. It was to be performed in a hemispherical temple in a lake in India, the reflection completing the perfect sphere, and at its climax, Nietzsche's leap to the Superman would occur, and revolution be fulfilled in an ecstasy of spirit. Though he had bought a cork helmet to explore the site, the World War, as with Thomas Mann, Hesse, and so many, intervened, turning the poem of fire to a baptism grosser than those post-romantics had conceived.